Awesome. Okay. Books to check out up here on the desk. A pad going around for you to write the roll. Yeah, I noticed it's a little bit weird. Okay. During the last couple of weeks, as we've been apart, we watched a couple of movies. All of them were terrible. Guardians 3, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse. I have to say, Doctor Who's 60th anniversary was not bad for Doctor Who. But you have to like Doctor Who. So, every one of these, and so many more like them, are apocalyptic battles between good and evil. Evil is usually disguised at some point in the movie. You're not quite sure who the bad guy is, or woman. Sometimes one of the good guys dies and gets revived. It's very interesting, some of the female figures in these movies. They're very much combinations of the biblical woman typology. They're either Eve or Mary, beloved mother, the bride, the virgin, or the opposite. And they might start out as one and then change to the other, the witch, the harlot, the unfaithful girlfriend, etc. For example, you've got Wanda, who is a loving mother with 2 little boys wearing jeans and a shirt until she turns into the Red Witch and terrifies her own children. So it's interesting imagery. The Red Witch is a murderous, sexualized sorceress, if you have never seen her. Usually there was some man, often disfigured, often with a false face, who is trying to force his will, which he saw as perfectly justified, on everybody else. And then he creates and calls up beastly creatures to battle, and this is the apocalyptic battle between good and evil. And all of this is biblical. And I wonder at times how much people see the biblical nature of these films. For example, you've got Good Omens. Season 1 was good. I'm not sure yet about season 2. You absolutely have to have read the book of Revelation in order to understand Good Omens by Neil Gaiman. And I think Terry Pratchett worked on it with him. If you have not read Revelation or have a basic understanding of it, that series is weird. Of course, so is Revelation. I was looking around online. Well, first of all, you all can see the biblical nature of Lord of the Rings. And that big final battle at Minas Tirith with Gondor versus Mordor, and the attacking wraiths on horses or dragons or whatever. That is called the Return of the King, and it is so blatantly biblical. Tolkien was a good Catholic, which is unusual, but you know, that was Armageddon. I was looking online at images just to see how people were depicting scenes from Revelation. And I found this really bizarre picture where it would appear that Sting was used, his image, in, what is it called? Call of Duty Black Ops 3 Revelations. And I think Sting is the Antichrist. I'm not really sure, but it's him. And so all of this imagery that is such a part of our popular culture is straight out of this book. And yet I don't think the majority of, at least Americans, are reading this book. So I'd love to know how they make sense of this stuff, what it means. to them. If you don't see the scene where Boromir in Two Towers, I hope you've all read or watched Lord of the Rings. There's a scene where Boromir has turned traitor, tries to take the ring away from Frodo, and then realizing what he has done, he repents and gives his life protecting others. And Aragorn, the king, shows up just as Boromir is dying, and you have a captain, my captain moment between the two. So biblical. And if you know the Bible, you're weeping at that point. Tolkien did a good job. But in order to understand this stuff, you also need to read the book of Ezekiel. I have 7 pages of notes here that I was going to use in this class, that I took for this class, and finally said, no, maybe another year in Ezekiel. 7 pages of notes from chapters 1 to 21, just on the book of Revelation imagery in the book of Ezekiel. What John is quoting from. I have a similar one that is 3 or 4 pages, because Zechariah is shorter, that is all of the quotations of the book of Zechariah in the book of Revelation. And when you do start reading commentaries and see books about Revelation, I have to say that the book of Revelation is popular for all the wrong reasons. It is easily misread and misused and misinterpreted. This is actually from 1990. I think it's 1990. And a local church in Ohio had a speaker coming in to talk about the book of Revelation and the end times. And the imagery was so classically bad that I just had to keep this pamphlet. But you can find this kind of thing on the internet, thousands of sites like this. So, with all of that being said, one of the most famous pieces of the book of Revelation in modern culture is the 666. So we're just going to go straight to it and talk about 666. And try to remind me, Elder, to hand you pictures when you because I'll forget. In the last 70 years, the number 666 has been associated with Hitler, Stalin, the Pope, and that would be any Pope, not just the current Pope, but any Pope, Saddam Hussein, and Osama bin Laden. I have seen all of that in my own lifetime or recent family history. So what does it actually mean? Well, that's really up for debate. And people have been expressing opinions on that subject, and they are all opinions, for 2,000 years, since this book got written. One of the things that they turn to is the fact that in both Hebrew, which John spoke Hebrew and was a Jew, and Greek, the book of Revelation, as we have it, is written in Greek. In both of those languages, numbers are letters. There's not 2 sets of symbols. This is a lot like Roman numerals. Okay? So in Hebrew, when you find that or study it, the study of that is called gematria. When you look at the Greek it isn't numerology, because numerology is all made up. Looking at Greek numbers in words is called isopsephy. Great name. And just to give you an idea, this is Aleph, that's the number 1. Bet is the number 2. Gimel is a 3, and Dalet is a 4. It's not an assigned value, it's the actual symbol used for that thing. And I should have brought in a concordance that I have. It's a Hebrew concordance where the verse numbers are written in Hebrew letters. Now, that might not sound terrible, but figuring out which symbol, which aleph you know is an aleph, and when it's being used as a 1, it's not obvious, and it's hard work. But the same thing can happen with Greek. Alpha is 1, beta is 2, gamma is 3, and delta is 4. Those were the shapes they used. As you can tell from that, the idea of 0 and a place value and decimals don't exist yet in their math. That won't come until the Arabs developed that. I don't know if other cultures had, but it's really thanks to the Arabs that we get something like algebra, where ironically they go back to using letters as numbers, but in a very different way. They're their variables. So the most famous use of gematria, or isopsephy, because it works for both languages, is to spell the name Nero Caesar. Now, that is not how you would spell Caesar in Hebrew or Greek. So what does that tell you? That immediately, really, you should probably use a kuf here. They write Q, but they mean this letter, okay? I don't know why they didn't put, okay. Because, you know, Kaiser in German is spelled with a K. So it should be a K, not a Q. But anyway, these are the numerical values of Nero Caesar, and that apparently is how his name was written at the time in Greek. It all adds up to 666. Nero killed himself in 68 AD. There were rumors that he was still going to come back to life. He was a beast of a man. And there are those who will interpret the wounded beast who comes back to power as Nero Redividius, which means Nero resurrected or brought back to life. Not quite the same thing. And that is a name that they use for Domitian, who is the horrible Caesar at the time, at about 100 when the book is being written. Is it about Nero and the Caesars? That probably plays into the story. But in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, and every one of these meanings of 666 is somebody's opinion, because John doesn't tell you what he's saying. 1 Samuel is where I go for what 666 means. And I think we've talked about this in class before. 1 Samuel chapter 17 is where David meets Goliath. And I am of the opinion that there is a ton of symbolism in the David and Goliath story that is used in telling the life of Christ. That it shows up, it's Goliath of Gath, and where Christ faces his greatest enemy, has to defeat death and hell itself, is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Gath is famous for semene, which is oil. They have oil presses. So they're in caves. It's, anyway, an interesting story. And one of the presidents of the church, either Kimball or Hinckley, talked about, what is your Goliath? And so there are other individuals who see Goliath typologically as the Antichrist, right? David is the Christ. He was just anointed in chapter 16. He's just been anointed king. So he is the Christos, Mashiach, Messiah, the anointed one. And Jesus' name, of course, is, one of his names is Son of David. So this conflict between the Christ and the Antichrist is a very interesting one. And the battle takes place in a valley between two hills, Philistines on one side, Israelites on the other. Down in the valley between is where David faces Goliath, and that is called the Valley of Elah, and that means the Valley of God. So much symbolism. But this description of Goliath in 1 Samuel 17 is totally gratuitous. We don't need to know this stuff. So why is it in there, right? Verse 4, there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. Now, in older versions of the biblical text, Dead Sea Scrolls, 1 Samuel chapter 17, that's 6,000 is the weight of his mail. Verse 7, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. His spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. We just heard 666 on 3 different levels. It happens to be 6,606, but it's still the same idea for the Antichrist, right? And more than playing around with the names of Greek Caesars and Roman Caesars and Hebrew numerology, and I wouldn't even go here. In Latin, if you use Latin numerology, which is artificial, I know that they use a V and an I and an X and a C and a D, but those are not the values used in writing a value for Nero. They have an assigned value. That is numerology. That's what we do in English, what we do in any other language. It is totally artificial, arithmancy, Masonic symbolism, numerology, all of that is made up. Values assigned by someone in order for them to create a symbolic meaning, not necessarily the inherent meaning of something. You see the difference? I hope you can see the difference. So, I believe we're talking about Goliath versus David as we talk about the 666. And as we talk more about antichrists, that's certainly one of our topics today. There are, someone has described the images in the book of the symbols, the picture, word pictures in the book of Revelation as you're walking through an art gallery. Now, some rooms in the gallery go in chronological order if the gallery chooses to do it that way. But generally, the pictures on the walls aren't ordered chronologically with each other. They may not even be related to each other. But as you walk through the room and look at the pictures, You get impressions from the paintings or whatever form of art is there, sculpture, and how they're juxtaposed with each other can sometimes be very interesting. I don't think there's an order necessarily in the images we're seeing. But I can assure you that you can look up online and find artistic versions of everything in the book of Revelation. These are the ones that were given to me when I was teaching early morning seminary. These are overhead projector overheads. And I show them because they're so bad, right? For example, we've already talked about having tapers with paraffin candles on them, which is not at all what the 7 candlesticks are in chapter 1. Christ is not dressed as he's described in that chapter, probably because we're a little bit concerned about modesty in the church, and we're not going to have God depicted without clothes covering his chest, even though the scriptures have him in a long robe from the waist down and a golden band girdle around his paps. What does that mean? We aren't going to show those, right? So we draw it according to our white Protestant ideas. So there's one out there. When you're trying to talk about the scorpions, we're doing this so that the video will see the pictures, because otherwise they can't see them. When you're talking about the locusts with faceplates and scorpions with stingers in their tail and the sounds and etc., the seminary manual said, how would you explain these to someone living 2,000 years ago? The implication was that what John was seeing was things like helicopters and planes with rockets and things from our day that he could not explain other than using very naturalistic descriptions, because he didn't have any other words for them. This one I found really interesting. This is pouring out the 7 vials of wrath upon the earth. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but those are the heads of the 12 apostles from the painting where Jesus is ordaining the 12. They've cut them off, put them all on essentially the same body, I don't know. At least they don't have wings. But this does not appear to be the positions that I would imagine a semi-divine or divine being standing in when they are pouring out wrath upon the wicked on the earth. This is so passive. They don't have any emotion whatsoever about all the terrible things that are occurring on earth. Is that real? So, interestingly, the one picture out of that set, I made copies for another teacher because they were no longer in print. So I called Salt Lake and asked, can I make photocopies, color photocopies of these, or transparency copies for them to use in their class? And they said, yes, you can do all of them except the one of Christ on the horse in red. You can't use that one. And yet that is the only one of these that is in this year's Come Follow Me manual. I have no idea why I was denied permission 30 years ago, and now it shows up in the book. But this is in the Come Follow Me manual. It's wrong. Let me just say that, okay? Yes, Christ comes dressed in red. Yes, there's a white horse. Yes, there's armies dressed in white. But that's the wrong image. We'll get to that. So, as we get into chapter 6, we find the opening of the 7 seals. And, oh, was I supposed to talk about colors? And did I skip that somewhere? No, okay, I thought I had. That's the next page, okay. This is the handout. It actually, I'll send you one, a copy from the student manual of how do we interpret the 7 seals of Revelation. And it has this chart which talks about each of the seals, what color the horse is, and then it tells you that this is from 4000 to 3000 BC. This is 3 to 2000 BC. This is 2 to 1000. This is 1000 to 0. Then 0 to 1000 AD. 1000. Is that right? Yes. To 2000 AD, and it actually says this, 2000 to 3000 AD, which means we're in the 7th seal, according to the seminary handout. Now, this is how it has been interpreted, that each seal is 1,000 years of Earth's time. Joseph Smith even says that. But then Bruce R. McConkie goes on, and he will tell you that the symbol here is Enoch, the person most important in, I'm sure I can't even spell Enoch. Try it again. In that millennium, Enoch's the most important guy. In this one, it's Noah. This is about Abraham. This is about Jesus, martyrs, and since Mormons aren't around yet, those are the Christian martyrs, and this is our day. Let me read you a quotation from Joseph Smith, which I find helpful. This is Teachings of the Prophet Joseph, page 289. If you're still using old books and page numbers. Joseph Smith said, "The things which John saw had no allusion to the scenes of the days of Adam, Enoch, Abraham, or Jesus. Only so far as is plainly represented by John and clearly set forth by him. John saw only that which was lying in futurity and which was shortly to come to pass." This is from page 247. "John had the curtains of heaven withdrawn, and by vision looked through the dark vista of future ages, contemplated events which should transpire through every subsequent period of time until the great winding up scene." So talking about the first 4 seals as being described and represented in the book of Revelation as those 4 periods of time and these people being the heads of those dispensations, Joseph Smith said no. And yet that is exactly what McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith taught. And so you need to be careful of whose interpretations you're using. You will find opposite positions on almost everything about the book of Revelation coming from our own leaders. What that suggests to me is anyone who stands up, like I am, and tells you this is what it means, is just giving you their opinion. And I hope you recognize this is just my opinion of how I interpret the text. This part, which Gerald Lund had done, is actually describing how many verses in the book of Revelation are talking about this particular seal or group of seals. So there are 6 verses, they're all in chapter 12, about the pre-existence with the dragon and his tail and being cast out of heaven. That's all before the fall. And this is what the chart actually says. There are 11 verses that cover seals 1 to 5. How much detail are you getting there? Okay. There are 14 verses on the 6th seal, which is our day. And yet many people will read the whole book of Revelation as if it's talking about our day. But if the 6th seal is our day, then you have to kind of play fast and loose. There are 211 verses that cover part of the 7th seal. And then within the 7th seal, you get 6, let me find this, here's the figure. This is what it looks like, and this line is slightly off. So there are 3 sections to the 7th seal. This is the first section, there's the second section, there's the third. And I will be sending you a digital version of this. So the millennium, you got 6 verses, final wrapping up scenes when Satan is bound, let free, and then bound again at the end of the millennium. And then the celestialization of the earth, which we'll talk about next week. There's 33 verses on that topic. Now, what that says to me is essentially everything, the vast, vast, vast majority of the book of Revelation is in the future. And it's difficult to find that in the signs of the times if we're still here. You have to decide where we are. What symbols are we talking about? And are we being careful about how we interpret things? Now, I would change this chart. It's my chart. It's my book. I'm going to change the chart. Okay? And what I would do, and I need an eraser here, is I would have, see, we don't need this stuff anymore. That will be on the handout that I sent you. So I can use that space for something else. Because of how I see Genesis and the chiastic nature of the plan of salvation, I read that onto this division of seals. And instead of just talking about before the fall, we need to have a time that is Edenic and a time that is before that. Okay? Because this was, and then we get up here, and this is, of course, millennial. And this is celestial. In terms of the days of the week, we've talked about the 8th day, which is Sunday. This is Sabbath. And the Sabbath, the day of rest, is millennial. Okay? So when you move your holy day off of 7 to 8, we tend to move all of the symbolism of the 7 onto the 8 as well. It's very helpful in understanding biblical symbolism to not do that. Okay? This is the first day of the week. This is the Lord's Day. That's different from the Sabbath. So the millennial period, the 7,000 years, is when Christ comes, but this is when the earth is changed and becomes celestialized, and it's an age. Well, back this way, millennial is a paradise, right? Which parallels Eden. You got all these trees growing beautifully. It's available, nobody gets sick. Probably people run around naked, it wouldn't matter. And so we have Eden. And before that, we had a celestial place where we were with Heavenly Father, His Son, Heavenly Mother, all the other spirits. I hope you see that pattern that we've seen over and over and over in this class of celestial, terrestrial, telestial, terrestrial, and celestial. The three sections of the temple, because so much of the imagery of the book of Revelation takes place where? In the temple. I mean, you've got before the throne of God, and the candlestick, and the incense, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we go back to leaving God's presence, coming into earth, where we have an altar of sacrifice, and in the meridian of time, we get the sacrifice of the Lamb that Revelation says was slain before the world was. But he's the guy who gets to open all the seals. This really is the most important focus of the book. And it comes along in chapter 5. So we come into earth life. We die, go to some part of the spirit world, and then finally resurrected and made celestial, and those that are celestial will dwell on this earth, which is a sea of glass. Really becomes interesting to see Joseph Smith's use of Revelation imagery in talking about millennium and the celestialized earth, and the process that the earth itself has gone through. Remember, we talked about how in chapter 2 of Genesis, God creates a garden, or he creates people and places them eastward in Eden. And of course, this is all going east until you get here, and then you just go back where you came from. Okay? So we get Eden, and earth was a paradise until the fall. So this line represents the fall. And you open the first seal, and you're thrown into a time of mortality where death is present. And the death of the Lamb is extremely important. And of course, you've got that in the story of Adam, Eve, offering offerings on the altar in the book of Moses. Abel as the first, not the first shepherd, because Adam and Eve also offer sacrifices, but Abel as the first martyr. You're going to hear voices and the blood of the martyrs crying from out of the ground. That's all the way back to the story of Abel and Cain, right? Your brother's blood is calling to me. So these are, although it's a New Testament book, it's all Old Testament imagery. And trying to divorce the book of Revelation from its Jewish roots and temple roots is just crazy. Okay. Yeah. So it's, I hope you see, a chiastic poem where you start out with Heavenly Father, you move into childhood, then you're into mortality, then you're back in a terrestrial place, and finally back where you started in the celestial kingdom. It's the same pattern I've been talking about in all my classes from Genesis through the book of Revelation. This is the plan of salvation. Salvation being Jesus, and he's the most important thing, right? The Savior who dies for us in the meridian of time. Okay, I think I have everything that matters. Oh, this is kind of fun. You're going from eternity to eternity, which is an 8 turned on its side. That's kind of a fun image. Whether it's real, I don't know, but I love it. I think God uses math in ways we don't recognize. Okay, we're back to this board. There's 4 words at the bottom, which you've probably never seen before, because they're used by other Christians, not members of the church. And these are 4 different schools of thought as you read other commentaries about the book of Revelation, and commentaries within our church might come from any one of these 4 schools of thought. So, first is preterist, which means the book of Revelation is being written to talk about the things in John's own day, using code language. So the dragon, the beast with a lot of heads, this is descriptions in this school of thought of the Roman Empire. And what's happening to the members of the church as they begin to be martyred. Remember, John's brother James is one of the very first martyrs. He's been beheaded by Herod, who was a tool of the Romans. So this is very close to home for John. He's been put in exile by the Romans. It was written talking about Rome, and either at the time that Nero was in power or Domitian, and Nero's time was 54 to 68 AD, and Domitian is 81 to 96 AD. We really don't know when the book of Revelation was written, but everybody will say it's before 100 because we have copies of it on little scraps from about 100 AD. Had to be written before that. Whether it's before or after the destruction of the temple, that's a good question. We don't really know. Second school, idealist. In this one, everything is symbolic. It doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one correspondence to some historical individuals. It is a symbolic description of this continuing struggle between good and evil. It is not predictive. It is about ethics. That one I have a hard time seeing with all the killing that's going on. And spiritual truths. That's the idealist school of reading. Now, that's an approach taken by people who don't see everything in the book being from John describing his own day. But also, it's a group of people who don't believe anyone can see the future, which is a whole lot of Christians. That's hard to conceive of from our point of view. But there are many Christians who say, look, no one can know the future. And when you think about Book of Mormon, I think that's one of the things that Sharon says, is no man can know things that haven't happened yet. So the idealist school works for that group. The historist is a prophetic way of approaching it, in the sense of it outlines in symbolic form the course of history from the time of the resurrection of Christ until his second coming. That events which happen in each of the seals are events which have either already happened during the Roman Empire or are soon to happen. And there are those in the history school who will, for example, connect the rise of the locusts as a description of the rise of Islam. So they're going to work really hard to take the images of futurity. So this is a little counterintuitive to call it historist and it talks about future. Okay, future history. Then we get the futurist school. And in the futurist school, chapters 1 to 3 are of John's own day and the 7 cities that he's writing letters to, and a vision that he has in his own day to talk to those 7 cities. But chapters 4 to 22 are all prophecies of future times. So a futurist does not see these seals in this way, but sees them all after the time of John. Who's right? Well, good questions. And this is one of the Ensign articles. This is from 1973, so very early in the Ensign. This is by Reed Durham. I actually took classes from him at the University of Utah Institute. And this is what it says with all these wonderful images, right? It seems certain, I love that, certain, that John saw the Roman Empire and its emperor as the present evil. A writer of apocalyptic literature needed to use a vocabulary filled with odd and strange symbols and images to disguise and hide the real message from the powers of the world. So that's Reed Durham, teacher at the University of Utah Institute, who's pretty much a preterist, okay? That everything in the book is during the Roman times. Now, I don't know who the editor was on this, but any time that you're writing about the book of Revelation and you call it Revelations, plural, I'm not going to believe a thing you have to say, because that's not the name of the book. It is not plural. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ given to, and so forth and so on. Okay? We're not careful enough. If you want people to give you credit, you need to be careful and get stuff right, at least based on the evidence you have. Do you want to show that one? That would be great. I also have this, and I'll send this out. This is from a 1992 Church Education Symposium, where Kent Dunford goes through the entire book of Revelation in 2 pages and answers all your questions. So if you find that helpful, I'll send you that. Okay? All right. As we enter into the seals, you get all kinds of interesting images. And one of the things that we have talked about in the past is types and shadows. And this may be the number one most important thing that I took away from Margaret Barker's book, which is called The Revelation of Jesus Christ, is talking about how every symbol used by the Antichrist, and that's what this word is down here in Greek, it is not a word used in the book of Revelation. Like that. maybe step back a minute and say, what do you mean it's not in there? Antichrist actually is from other writings of John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. He talks about the Antichrist. What is an Antichrist? It is someone taking symbolism from Christ, from the Messiah, from the Anointed One. Those are the three ways the word works in English, Greek, and Hebrew. Hebrew is Messiah. Greek is Christ. English is anointed. Same word, okay? And so I have talked from the beginning of our class on down about who is a Christ figure, who is anointed for their roles in the storyline. And probably the majority of Scripture is either written by or about people who've been anointed. It's very Christ-centered in that way. So when you look at the figures who are anointed in the Old Testament, the king, the priest, the prophet, the bride, and she's always a virgin prior to marriage, right? I mean, that's the culture. What you're going to find in Revelation is the Antichrist takes that imagery and twists and distorts it and uses it for evil. So you will see a king coming to conquer. His whole focus is the wicked king in the book of Deuteronomy, who's going to take your kids and make them his slaves. He's going to tax you to death. He's going to force you into battle. That's what that king is about. That's King Noah in the Book of Mormon. The righteous king, King Benjamin in the Book of Mormon, is the one who works for his own needs, who, like King Saul, is out plowing his own fields, is there to protect you, not throw you into the front of the battle to be killed for him, not make you cannon fodder. You talk about priests, and one of the early confrontations about priesthood in the New Testament is where Simon Magus wants that priesthood power that Peter has, and he offers him money to get it. And that ability to use magic to have power to do incredible things no one else can do, we call that magic and sorcery now. In terms of the prophet, you'll have false prophecies, soothsayers. The bride is countered, and we'll talk about the female imagery next week. The bride is countered by the harlot. And the name of the harlot is Jezebel, which is exactly the name of the harlot in the Book of Mormon, Isabel. It's a type. It's a symbol. And the virgin is the daughter of Zion. That's her home, which is a walled city. And she is enclosed and safe. She's not only inside the walls of the city, you've got your, it wasn't until we lived in Europe that I said, oh, that's what's going on in this language. You've got the walls, and then you have the inner walls and the bailey and all of that. And in the very center, you've got the keep, which is a high tower in the center where you put your most valuable family members. That's where you're putting your bride, your wife, and your kids in the keep. And this also is a depiction of the city of Jerusalem, the wall around the temple, and the tower is the Holy of Holies. I don't know if you've noticed, you go up as you go from room to room. Certainly in the Salt Lake Temple, you spiral upwards, taking the stairs. Now in the smaller temples, you only go up about 4 inches between each room, but you're still going up, and that tower is the Holy of Holies. And that's where that bride is supposed to be, is in the Holy of Holies, in the center of Zion. The name Jezebel relates to all of this. Zebel, the final three letters, it's the Hebrew word for an enclosed or walled city. And Jez, or yeah, or I, or how do you pronounce two vowels in a row that aren't actually vowels but are consonants? Good luck. It means not. Not an enclosed city. Anybody can come in. Do you see how that's symbolic? This one, nobody gets in but the king who has the key. This one, anybody comes in. And usually they pay for it. And that is Babylon. And Babylon was the great enemy. Now, earlier in the Old Testament, it was Egypt and Pharaoh. But then after the time that Lehi and his family leave, and Israel gets hauled off into captivity, and Judah into captivity in Babylon, Babylon becomes the type for the great evil conquering bad guy who takes you into captivity. And I was really struck when I walked into the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the city of Pergamon, I showed a picture and sent out in an email, a picture of the Pergamon altar, which German archaeologists picked up piece by piece, moved to Berlin, and reassembled. And it's 100 and some odd feet long and 50 feet deep and 40 feet high. It's a massive construction that they hauled all the way from Turkey back to Germany. If you walk through this door, that's where that altar is. And this is the gate of Ishtar from Babylon. These are the walls of Babylon reconstructed in Berlin. Now, the Germans were smart. They didn't bring every brick. They only brought the bricks to make the symbols, which are dragons and bulls. This is the dragon that's on the wall, and one of those dragons with the blue tiles, they're absolutely gorgeous blue tiles, was in the Cleveland Art Museum where we lived for 25 years. And I didn't really think about it as being part of the walls until I saw this and said, oh, okay, they got one of the dragons, and the Germans got 10, 20, 30, 40 of the dragons and bulls that they took home to Germany. It's absolutely exquisite to see. And they replicated the blue stones in Germany, made their own. So those are not authentic to the time period, but this is the pattern of the walls of the city of Babylon and the dragon, which represents the king of Babylon on the walls. If you don't know, and that's Jeremiah, if you don't know that the king of Babylon is the dragon, then you're missing what this dragon means. So here's, sorry, wrong chapter of Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah 51, verse 34. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out of my land. And what God's going to do to Babylon, in consequence of Babylon's actions, is, verse 37, Babylon shall become heaps. If you were to go back and look at Babylon, when the Germans arrived and picked up these pieces, all you would see were heaps and ruins and a tower. Saddam Hussein was rebuilding the city of Babylon. And so if you go to Babylon today, you can see Saddam Hussein's new city. What is he saying about himself? That he's the dragon, he is the king of Babylon, which in Isaiah is a description for Satan, is the king of Babylon. He seeks to take over God's throne. Okay. Babylon will become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons. This one I thought was interesting in the Book of Mormon says, in their heat I will make their feasts. I will make them drunk, that they may rejoice, and then sleep, a perpetual sleep, and not awake, as God takes his people out of captivity. Can you see that that's the story of Alma and Limhi and his people? Is right there in Jeremiah.
Can you say the reference again?
That's Jeremiah 51:39. Now, had Jeremiah written that before Lehi left? We don't know. They were contemporaries. How much of Jeremiah's writings did Lehi have? We don't know. But it helps us, I hope you can agree, it really helps you understand the book of Revelation when you see those connections made in the Old Testament. So what is the dragon? It's this antichrist. And how is a dragon a stolen symbol from Jesus? We've done that before. We've talked about it before in class. But when you think about the serpent raised up in the wilderness that you look to be healed, that serpent is one of the same words used in describing the seraphim, which have 6 wings that surround the throne of God, which is like Revelation chapter 4 and 5. And Nephi will talk about the flying fiery serpents that bit the people during the Exodus. He takes the wings of Isaiah and sticks them on the copper-colored serpent, and you end up with a dragon. I think that the imagery of the dragon for Christ, and if you think about Chinese dragons, all of them are benevolent. The same symbol becomes horror and power and death in European symbolism, but it's I don't know where I've been most of my life, but it wasn't until I went to the city of Worms that I understood that the worm, it's a W, right, is the dragon. And that Siegfried and the Rhine maidens and everybody and all of those stories from Wagner and Lohengrin and all of that stuff, it's all right there. And the worm is a description of the dragon. The Greek is actually draken. That's the Greek word for dragon, so it isn't too hard to see all of these symbols, and it will actually go on in Jeremiah and talk about lions and beasts and other animals, wild animals, representing the Antichrist. Because what represents Christ? The lamb, the ram, the bullock, the red heifer. Okay, we've got animals that represent Christ and those that represent the king of Babylon. You've got serpents that heal and serpents that are venomous. He shall have power to bruise thy heel. Right? Satan's already stealing that symbol all the way at the back. The idea of using symbols, pictures to tell stories is very, very old in ancient cultures because so few people were literate. And this is one of my favorite places. This is called Beth Alpha Synagogue. It's a 2nd century synagogue in Israel. And one of the pieces depicted on that floor in the center of the synagogue is the Ark of the Covenant, the 2 menorahs, lions on each side, spoons and sickles and palm branches and all kinds, and you can see that this is the veil of the temple that has been pulled back. You can go ahead and show that. This is a placemat that I got at Beth Alpha when I was there. They were not going to go there on our tour, but I had mentioned it and talked about it with the tour guide, and he said, okay, this is for Rebecca. We're going to Beth Alpha. He gave us 15 minutes. In the center of the floor is this zodiac, which has a symbol for each of the 12 tribes. You've got a bull, you've got a lion, you've got a goat, you've got fish, you've got snakes, you've got all kinds of interesting things that aren't literal in any way, they are symbolic. Now, one of the big questions archaeologists have is, what is a Greek and Roman zodiac doing on the floor of a Jewish synagogue where you're not allowed to make any graven images? My personal interpretation is that the Jews took the imagery of their day and applied it to themselves. And so they used the signs of the zodiac to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, which nobody else does. I mean, nobody makes that connection. But right smack in the center is, if you were reading this anywhere else, this would be Apollo, the son of the Most High God, Zeus, who rides in a golden chariot drawn by 4 horses, a chariot of fire, it's gold. And he rides that across the sky every day. That's the sun. And that is also Israel's symbol for Jehovah and his chariot that came down and picked up Elijah. And those are the horses and the chariots we find in the book of Revelation, where you have white and red and black and pale horses. You need to go back and read Zechariah chapter 6. Let's read some verses from there, because otherwise you don't realize these are Old Testament images, not something new to John. Chapter 6, verses 1, 2, and 3. I turned and lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. Okay. This is how you're usually going to see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse depicted, right? Each riding a horse, and they look terrible. And here they come, riding to massacre. But let's go back and read what it said. It says there's not 4 horses, there are 4 chariots. And they're coming from between 2 mountains. What does that mean if you've got a valley between 2 mountains? Can you see it's David and Goliath? Or it's the covenant-making ceremony that Joshua takes the children of Israel into the land at Ebal and Gerizim. And those mountains are made out of brass, which is what the serpent is made out of. Whose mountains are these? where are these chariots coming from? Not just horses, but horses pulling chariots. On the first, and it says in the first chariot. Now, obviously, the horses are not riding in the chariot. They are pulling the chariot, right? In the chariot were red horses. In the second chariot were black horses. The third chariot were white horses, and the fourth chariot were grizzled or bay horses. See how John's using those same images? And who comes riding in the chariot of fire? And there was a chariot and horses, statues, at the temple in Jerusalem until the time of Hezekiah, when he had them removed. So when you see a chariot on top of a massive arch, like, say, Brandenburg Gate, or on top of one of the major buildings in Rome, or, I don't know, you name it, almost every nation has a park that has that monument. And often it's victory, or it's peace, or it's somebody riding in that chariot. And that's this image of these chariots, and Jehovah is one of them. And the only image I have found of the chariots as the four horsemen of the apocalypse is by Gustave Doré. And he's got the mountains, and he's got the chariots, and of course the angels have wings. But you do the best you can. Take what you can get. So we've got these horses and chariots, and as they come, and this is, let me turn back to chapter 6. We haven't even left chapter 6. Behold, a white horse. He went forth conquering and to conquer. Another horse that was red had power to take peace from the earth. To him was given a sword. He opened the third seal, and the third beast said, come and see, and lo, a black horse, and he had a pair of balances in his hand. A voice said, a measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny. And when he opened the fourth seal, I saw a pale horse, and often it's a greenish. So the color of death, actually, is what they're describing. And he that sat upon him was death and hell. And he was to kill with the sword and with hunger and with death. Now, if you're not hearing the Deuteronomic curse as you read about these horses, you're missing the connection. So we want to go back to Deuteronomy chapter 28, which is the covenant curses and blessings. And in chapter 28, as you're having the curses being pronounced, it will say, starting in 21, chapter 28, verse 21, the Lord will make pestilence cleave to thee. The Lord shall smite thee with consumption and fever and inflammation, with the sword and with mildew. The heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, the earth like iron. The Lord will make rain as powder. Famine, pestilence, and sword. Those, along with wild beasts, will be the curse that Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Isaiah will all repeat. Famine, pestilence, and the sword. Your carcasses will lay on the ground. You will be made desolate. So in the Book of Mormon, when they find carcasses laying all over the ground, they name the town Desolation, right? That's the covenant curse. And Ezekiel is probably the most vivid. This is Ezekiel chapter 5. I'm skipping a bunch over here. And it's talking about verse 12, chapter 5, verse 12. A third part of thee shall die with pestilence. A third, and famine, and by the sword. And I will send famine, and evil beasts, and pestilence, and the sword, and famine upon you. I mean, it's over and over and over. So these are the coming, not necessarily of 4 different leaders in different times, but rather you're being wicked enough that Jehovah is coming on his white horse, and with him come famine and pestilence and the sword. And that's what he brings, and that's also chapter 19. Many of the signs that John will talk about, earthquake, the sun turning to blood, the
sun, dark, and moon turning to blood.
Sun and moon and the stars fall like figs, are all descriptions of historical events happening in the 100 years before the time of John. You had from about 150 BC to 70 AD, a hurricane destroyed all of the crops in the country in 64 BC, and they described the falling stars as a fig sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. That's the falling of the stars. You have famine in 38 BC during a sabbatical year. I don't know if you realize how terrible it would be you're already doing the sabbatical year, you're not planting crops, and then you get no water. There was an epidemic just after Herod executed his wife Miriamne. And the people thought it was a judgment of God upon the people. Thousands died in Jerusalem. A famine hit in 25 BC, accompanied by drought and plague. An earthquake occurred in 31 BC that destroyed innumerable cattle and 30,000 people. So what John is describing are the kinds of events people are experiencing. And so when we see those same things happen in our day, we say, oh, the signs of the times. Well, yeah, exactly like for John. I'm not sure that those aren't a natural part of life on earth. But this whole time that we're on earth is a piece out of eternity that's terrible, and a lot of death is going to happen. Famine and pestilence and the sword. And then we get the sounding of 7 trumpets and 144,000, which Joseph Smith will say are high priests, who are sealed in their foreheads. And then you have 2 witnesses. Now this drives me crazy as well. The trumpets are actually shofars, not jubilee horns. The 144,000, lots of different interpretations of that. One is you've got 12 times 12, which is talking about Jews, and you have 144,000 of the house of Israel, John says, and innumerable people of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. So this is not quite how the Jehovah's Witnesses, who see that only 144,000 righteous will be saved. No. The suggestion is that the 144 is talking about Jews, and the 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10, and 10 is a number about Gentiles. So you combine the 2 together and you have innumerable host of righteous that John divides literally into 2 different groups, both being saved. This one down here, you've got the 2 witnesses who are martyred and lie in the streets, and you'll notice they're young, 20-year-old blonde missionaries with name tags. Probably not. Okay? Probably not. And notice everyone in that picture is white. we need to be more careful about how we depict heaven. Are only white men getting in? Okay, so other suggestions for those two martyrs that might line the streets and then be raised from the dead, Jesus and John. Possibilities. Moses and Elijah, both who were expected to be brought back, right? Alive. But maybe even better is Peter and Paul, who would have died in Rome just 10 or 15 years before this book is written. Two very important martyrs in the Christian church. Okay. The last thing we have any time for is these two words. And since we started 5 minutes late, I'm taking 5 minutes more. And this is a beast rising out of the sea and a beast rising out of the land. These are the traditional enemies in Egyptian, in Mesopotamian, Hittite, and Israelite, if you want to call it mythology, of God battling chaos and creating the world. And he forces Leviathan down into the waters. It's one of the reasons you don't want to go on the waters. But Behemoth is a land animal. And you have a battle in the book of Revelation at some point between Leviathan and Behemoth. Now, what is the one that people talk about, shark versus predator? I don't know. Anyway, there's an internet meme with a shark battling a land animal and who's going to win. Now, I will bet you anything that the people making those memes don't recognize how old their ideas are. And listen to a couple of the verses referencing these. Psalm 74, verses 13 and 14. Starting at 12. My God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces. Do you notice that they have multiple heads? Okay. Why might there be 7 heads on a dragon? I don't know, but it's all the way back in the Psalms. Thou breakest them in pieces and gave him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Wait until you get to chapter 19 and see what people are eating. It's interesting. This is chapter 13, by the way, where they come out of the sea. Psalm 104. I don't know why I didn't write the Psalms, but there you go. 104, verse 24. Yeah. O Lord, how manifold are thy works, and wisdom thou hast made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein are all things creeping, innumerable, both small and great beasts. There go the ships, there goes Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. So Leviathan gets associated not only with the serpent, a sea serpent with multiple heads, but also with whales. And so there are books and stories and other things about Leviathan as a whale. But we can also consider that it might be the crocodile that lives in the water, which was the personal symbol for Pharaoh. And you see that in the pearl of great price in the facsimile where Abraham is being offered on the altar. Down at the bottom is the crocodile waiting to eat him. Then you have the false prophet that comes out of the earth, which is Behemoth. And they have found the bones of a proto-rhinoceros that was over 30 feet long. Is this something that people had found bones way back in antiquity and didn't know what else this might have been? But it is, Behemoth is the word used for cattle in most places in the Old Testament. There is a Jewish legend that both Leviathan and Behemoth will fight each other. Leviathan is a female serpent. Behemoth is a male with lots and lots of sexual imagery associated with him. You want to think about Zeus as the bull kind of imagery. And so easily used by an evil culture because you've got the sexual imagery there and you've got power and destruction. Both of those beasts are other antichrists. There's an interesting line in chapter 13, verse 4, that I think we don't recognize what's being referenced. 13, verse 4. They worship the dragon who gave power unto the beast. They worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war like him? They're quoting from the Song of the Sea, written by Moses, chapter 15 of Exodus, where Miriam leads the people in singing as they come up out of the sea. And the song there is, who is like our God? Who is like Jehovah in battle? And in the children's animated video, Prince of Egypt, they wrote a song for that song, and it goes, Mi chamocha Adonai. Who is like you, Adonai, Jehovah, among the gods? So they're even using anti-Christian music, taking the words of hymns and twisting it to use in their version of things. You have the sealing of the individuals, the mark of the beast. And idealists will say, well, preterists will say, you needed to have a document with a seal on it in order to do economic trading, buying and selling and trading in the Roman cities. That's how they interpret it, using Roman coinage, which had on it, of course, an image of Caesar with rays of light going out from his head, proclaiming that he is God. An idealist will say, well, it's not a literal person or a literal mark. Historists will say, from the church all the way from Ezekiel down to Daniel to Revelation, it's about empires and about the Persians and the Greeks and the Seleucids and the Romans, and you just look at the sweep of empires, and futurists say, oh, it's the popes and the church. Seventh-day Adventists see the mark of the beast as changing the Sabbath to Sunday. I don't know how they do that, but they do. I have heard that the mark of the beast is microchip implants, that putting on a mask during COVID was the mark of the beast. Yeah.
Wait.
I take it back to, since you have the mark in your forehead and on your hand, that's where the tefillin were placed as you prayed in Judaism. And that's the leather straps where you wrap a box with the commandments on it, and they both leave marks. You can see the marks on the forehead from the box. These leather straps leave us marks, and on your hand, it actually leaves, as it's wrapped around, it leaves a mark that looks like this. That's, you wrap it around several fingers. And that's the letter sheen in Hebrew. It looks like a W. But there are those who have interpreted it to say, the mark on the hand, this W, is made out of 3 vowels. That's this letter right here. And they all hook together like this. And that has the value of 6 and 6 and 6. The mark of the beast is being compared to Jews still using tefillin to make marks on their hands. Now you will still see the marks on the arms and foreheads of Jews who have been burned. So I think that that's more of a meaning of the mark. That and the economics, I don't know that we really think about how much participating in Babylon is the consumerism in our culture. As we read about Babylon next week, this idea that the king of Babylon controls who buys and who sells. He controls all the money, all the power. He controls the armies. So you're looking at something like the military-industrial complex of our youth in the 70s. But consumerism is such a curse. And it's only when I went to Europe and got away from American culture and saw people living in 700-year-old houses, and they hadn't bought any new furniture in the last 300 years. Because what they had was good enough. And yet we tie ourselves, we sell ourselves for things that I think are more a part of Babylon than Zion. Zion's philosophy is more, we have sufficient for our needs. Whereas Babylon is more. And that is the end result of that more is also the destruction of the land as we take stuff out of the ground and as we throw it back in after we've used it. There are a lot of groups of Christians who are looking at how we live and saying, this doesn't seem to be what Christ would do. To cut down the forests, to scrape away the surface of the earth to get more rare metals. We need to think about which side we're on. Which types are we following? How are we responding to the warnings of the book of Revelation? Can we see evil around us? And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And Marie.